Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Dutchy Gaming and the last episode of this installment of Wheel of Fortune, where the wheel told me I had to play a Necromancer EarthQuake build and kill Shaper for under 10x. So the episode is going to split into several parts. The first is going to be talking about how the build fell a little bit flat, pros and cons of the build and the skill and ascendancy combination. Then we're also going to talk about the actual Shaper fight, and then just general mapping and bossing performance of the build. Second part's going to go over why I decided to build around Hollow Palm, and we'll take a look at the tree and the gear. And then finally, we'll talk about the end cost of the build. So as mentioned in the previous episode, I've built around the one with nothing jewel just because it was the easiest way to get a lot of damage into the build without messing around too much and worrying about getting really good fizz weapons and trying to get to the area of the tree where all the decent fizz nodes are. By using Hollow Palm, you can basically stack decks to some degree to try and get enough damage in the build to kill Shaper. I think you'd probably have to spend a bit more to push the build much further, because we did forego some defenses, which we'll come on to in a bit. So in general, how's the build gone? And it's been okay, but I hate slams in general. So to me, the build felt really bad to play. So I actually stopped at 82 and just decided I was going to take on Shaper as I was, because I really didn't fancy another 7 to 8 levels of playing this skill. I didn't like slams when they were meta. I hate them even more now because they're much harder to get damage with the changes to war cries. Other problem we had is you lose a lot of gem slots with Hollow Palm, so we couldn't really stack war cries and stuff anyway. So mapping in general felt okay, but that was mainly down to Vile EarthQuake. It's quite a fun skill to use. Once your Vile skill comes up, you hit it, and then you just run around and everything dies. That part of it was quite fun. But when you don't have Vile EarthQuake up, it's a little bit clunky because your aftershocks, which it comes after the main hit, is what deals most of the damage. So you can end up getting into some pretty uncomfortable situations when you get a big pack of enemies. You hit the ground, hardly any of them died, and you have to wait for your aftershock to go off to kill enemies. Bossing was also fine, and with Hollow Palm, we were dealing enough damage to take down the bosses before they could do too much damage to me. Defenses, on the other hand, are pretty much neglected. It felt awful, and I'll come over to this when we go over the gear and the tree. So regarding the actual Shaper fight, because my only defenses is a little bit of armor, don't have spell suppression, and I don't have any spell block, the mini boss is actually causing more problems than Shaper. There's a lot of things that normally you wouldn't even worry about with one-shot in the build. And things didn't get off to the best start when I tried and failed to hide behind the wall on the first boss and died. I then died twice to the second mini boss, and I was about to give up. And I thought, well, no, we'll go through. If anything, it can be a practice run. And actually, I just about got through it on 6 portals. It was just difficult on 3.6k life because everything stuns you. Any Ellie spell whatsoever just absolutely rips the character to shreds. However, because we've got a few things in our ascendancies when we're using corpses, we can chill and shock enemies if we've got a corpse nearby. So I was able to slow enemies and Shaper down a lot, which helped a ton, as I said, because all of his attacks, certainly like his Shaper balls, would one-shot me. So I did get the job done and kill Shaper. I played the fight absolutely terrible. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and I basically wanted to get the series wrapped up. I didn't want to have to play the next day on this character because I'm really not enjoying it that much anymore. Luckily, I got through in 6 balls. The fight itself, if I hadn't played it sloppily, would have been okay because all of his attacks are really easily telegraphed. The only thing I was really bad on was the ground degens. I could have managed them a lot better. But overall, got it done. I did think I would. As soon as I realised I could use Hollow Palm, it was always going to be able to get the job done. Did it for between 5 to 6x. Could have done it cheaper, but for the same reason I gave up at 82, I just wanted to get the items bought and get the build done. So if we could call it a build, I'll run through kind of the pros and cons that I come across. So the pro is that the Necromancer Ascendancy actually synergizes quite well with EarthQuake because there's lots of things that give you extra AoE, extra damage, extra defenses. If you've either got a corpse nearby or you've consumed a corpse recently. So I used the Bubonic Plague Abyss Boots, as you just basically, whenever there's a corpse on the ground, you explode the corpse and that counts as consuming it. Just because the lack of gem slots I got, I was never going to be able to put like, Desecrate, Offering and loads of other bits in there because I just didn't have the sockets for them. We also get a bit of Ellie Res from the Ascendancy, which helps massively. So obviously on Hollow Palm, you're short of some gear pieces, so it is quite hard to get resistance capped. I didn't bother doing Uber Lab because the fourth lab didn't offer me that much because I didn't have a gem socket to actually be able to use an offering, so there was little point doing the Uber Lab. Single target was fine because we had about 1,000 decks, maybe a little bit short of 1,000 decks, with not too much money invested, and it was enough single target for map bosses, and Shaper was okay, I would say. Going on to the cons of the build, there's quite a few. Because I was obviously, I wouldn't say a limited budget, but it wasn't a high budget, I was super squishy. You lose, obviously, decks from gloves, you lose, let's say you use a shield, you lose life and res from that. So we were down quite a bit on stuff that you normally take for granted on a build. And the tree's quite tight because I need to take cluster jewels to get damage. So defensive nodes, we were never going to be able to get all of them to get spell suppression because, again, we were using unique boots. A good spell suppression chest would probably make the build a lot more expensive. So we just foregoed spell suppression and block. So we just had armor, which with Flask Up was about 18k maybe, and then just 75% elemental resistance capped. If I was going to push it further, I would try and maybe get this build up to 78, 79% Ellie cap and just make it a bit more comfortable and tanky because it did feel really bad in most situations when you got stuck or stunned. The build also felt quite clunky. It was using Pulverize to get extra damage and extra AoE, and that slows your attack down, and that did nearly get me killed quite a few times when I didn't have my Vile EarthQuake up. Once I got my Curse on Hit Ring, the build felt a bit better because there was also clunkiness around bossing because you need to make sure, firstly, there's a corpse down. You need to make sure there's other corpses down that you can consume if there's no ads. You've then got a curse, and there's just quite a lot to do. Once I got the curse on hit ring, it cut down some of the clunkiness of bossing. And then the last thing is, because we don't use a weapon or an offhand, can't really use any decent movement skills, so I was limited to flame dash, and again, that felt quite bad. So what we'll do is just move on and talk about why I chose Hollow Palm. And the simple reason is it was the easiest and probably the cheapest way to get the character geared to kill Shaper. It's got the benefits also of being super OP when leveling, so it's really, really easy to level with Hollow Palm. If I was to actually do this build seriously and try a proper EQ Necro, I would probably go like a big two-hander, spec into clusters, get some block, get Bone Offering to boost the block up, but just try and make a tanky character that's good enough to kill most of the bosses. But this isn't like a long-term project. It's more, this is the end goal. Once it's done, it's done. And I knew it could get done on Hollow Palm. That's the reason I chose it. So if we look at the character, I'll go through the gear and the tree. So the tree, we're literally just beelining down here to get to clusters and get to this dex node here. Take careful planning here to turn everything else into dex. My two clusters are pretty much the same. They are Iron Breaker and Force Multiplier on both of them, I think. And then Master the Fundamentals again on both to give me some res and some fizz damage. So these clusters are really needed because we've got loads and loads of flat fizz, but this side of the tree, we don't really get any percentage physical damage. So that's why these clusters are used. I found a Megalomaniac with Pride Reservation and gain an Endurance charge when hit. Obviously Hollow Palm up there. And then I took Determination Reservation here because that allowed me to run all my auras. So I could run Purity of Elements for the res and the ailment immunity, Determination, Pride, and then Defiance Banner to get the defenses shored up as much as I can, really. And then I found a Watcher's Eye, I think was 1x, which just gives me Chaos Res when affected by Purity of Elements and increased fizz damage when using Pride. And this was kind of the last purchase I made because I wanted to go and try and kill Shaper, and I was lacking a little bit in damage, so this cluster jewel kind of made up for it. And then if I had one more point, I could have taken this, which is 40% increased damage with hits against unique enemies, but I didn't want to do another level, so we just went for the Shaper fight. But the tree is really straightforward. You're basically looking for life and dex. And I mentioned in the last one I was looking to drop these nodes, but even with accuracy on my ring, I still needed this extra accuracy bonus to make sure that my accuracy was still above my life for Precise Technique to give us the massive damage boost. And that's really it for the tree. There's not much to it. So we'll go through the gear. So as mentioned, I use Fractal Thoughts just because it's a nice damage boost because strength is higher than int. So it means you get 15% increased dex. And it comes with a half decent amount of evasion. Some life because we do have intelligence, but it's probably only about 50 life. This was just a lazy purchase. I couldn't be bothered to spend ages thinking about like a rare helmet that might work. So I just went for that. We've got Astramentus, and then we've anointed Bastion Breaker because it's quite cheap. and it's really good. It overwhelms 20% phys damage reduction, and we get 30% increased physical attack damage. I've gone for a curse on hit vulnerability ring with some accuracy, which in the end I didn't need. This was to try and drop those precision nodes, and I really should have POB'd it first. But it's just got a little bit of resistances, and that's about it, because LE damage does nothing for us. And then the second ring, I just wanted something with Dex and Life. And then just to make the build a little bit more comfy, I crafted minus mana cost, because it is quite an expensive skill. So even with that, it's 32 mana. The chest piece I think I had in the last episode, it is just a 12 chaos chest piece rolled with Shrieking Essences of Greed. The belt base was 1x, then I've just rolled it with Dexterity Essences until it's something that was half decent. The reason there's strength crafted on it is because my strength is very close to my intelligence. If I don't craft that, my intelligence is higher than my strength, and my helmet will not proc the dex bonus, which is pretty important. And then the last item, I probably didn't need this for bosses and should have gone in with a different pair of boots. These are more the mapping boots. They're bubonic trails. The reason I'm using these is because it triggers Death Walk, which essentially when you walk over a corpse, it explodes it. That counts as consuming it. And then that works really well with our ascendancy point here, which is increased attack and cast speed per corpse consumed recently. You also get Chill and Shock on an enemy when you spawn a corpse nearby. And then here again, if we consume a corpse, we get 30% increased AoE. And again, with a corpse nearby, there's more damage we give, and we take less damage. So those boots just seemed like a nice, easy way to get everything into the build. I didn't even buy a gem in the end. I just stuck in one of my leveling ones again. If I was not being so lazy, I could have put a different gem in there. But that's really it for the build. And flasks, I didn't actually change them from the campaign. So again, lazy on my part. We could have definitely got some more defenses in there. But the reason I've kind of not tweaked any of this is because I got so fed up with the playstyle of EarthQuake. It's just you hit, you wait, it goes off, you move, you hit, you wait, then you use your Vile EarthQuake and off you go. It's just not particularly fun. In terms of the cost of the build, it was between 5 and 6x I spent on it. I could have spent less if I would have bought more carefully, and I could have spent more if I wanted to get kind of more defenses or more damage, but this did enough. Certainly not anything I would recommend trying, and why would you? There's hundreds of different ascendancies that work better if you want to do an EarthQuake build. The skill in general, I just don't like slams, as I've said, so it's not something I would ever try again. I will be doing another Wheel of Fortune in the next couple of days. I'm hoping for something that requires a bit more thinking. Like Hollow Palm was the easy option, but I don't want to make things harder for myself. The purpose of this series is to build the character the best way you can with your knowledge to get the goals done. It's not pick something and then build it in the most off-meta way you can think of. The off-meta part comes from the fact that you're throwing the build together from 4 random spins of a wheel. So the intro for the next episode should be out in the next couple of days. I say, hoping I'm getting something a bit more quirky, but not, impossible. But we'll have to see what the wheel dictates. But that's it for this episode. There'll be a POB in the description. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.